Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. And though I am at Rutgers University, I'm the department chair and county agent only in Atlantic County, not for the whole state, although we tend to blur lines in our responsibilities across the state and or across the region. So I'm glad to be able to join you this morning. And let me get started, see if this will work. Got the right one. Okay, so the talk I wanted to give today, a command repeat performance as I gave it to a smaller group in the fall for you. But know your customers to know your prices. And just as a little bit of a background, this is part of a series I call Marketing 101. And years ago, I was asked to give a talk at another Delaware meeting, one of your Ag Week meetings, by a friend and colleague at the University of Delaware. And he asked me to talk about marketing your produce. Well, I thought about that for quite a while before I put the talk together. And it dawned on me that we're actually talking about the whole thing backwards. What we need to be doing is talking about producing for your market. You can't just produce it and hope that you can sell it at the end of the season when it's time to harvest it. You really need to know what you're doing before you put a seed in the ground. And as I like to point out, it's not your grandfolks' farm anymore. You just can't plant it and hope that they'll buy it. You need to plan well in advance to make sure that it's all going to be sold and profitable for you. So let's go into this. Number one rule in marketing, I like to tell this and I'll re-emphasize this a couple of times. Give your customers what they want. Customers are always right. If you know your customers, then you're going to know the right crop to grow. You're going to harvest it at the correct stage. Some people like small zucchini and others like baseball bats, but nary the two will mix. Harvest it or package it appropriately, depending on where you're going. That may be bulk and open containers, or you may need to pre-wrap or pre-sort everything that you harvest. And that also, customers will give you a fair idea of what the right prices are. They'll let you know really quickly if things are too expensive or the guy down the street is selling it much cheaper. I ran into that putting fresh raspberries out in front of my house, and they said, I can get these same things down the street for about half the price. So they'll let you know right away. And of course, you want to keep those buyers happy, and that'll help you avoid costly mistakes. To get to know your market, there are different tools and techniques that you want to use. Analysis of the market helps you find your customers and understand and get to know them. Once you've found the right customers, you want to target them and draw them in. Those could be through subscription programs such as CSAs, Community Supported Agriculture. Before CSAs became a thing, clubs, mail clubs were an option, and they still exist, but it's not as popular as the CSA on small farms. You might draw them in with coupons or promotional events, lots of ways to target and draw in those customers. And then the biggest job you have is retaining those customers. It's much easier to keep a loyal customer than it is to go out and bring in new customers. So once you have your customers and your customer base, you want to do everything you can to make sure that they are happy with your product and happy with your service, and they'll keep coming back. And they'll pretty much let you know that too. But if they're dissatisfied, what you don't want them doing is telling all their neighbors and friends of their bad experience. And that's one of the worst things you can do. On the other side is once you have those customers, there are techniques for getting and keeping them. Selling techniques such as advertising, the merchandising, how you place your product and lay out your store. your displays, all of those go into selling your products. That's the direct sale part of it, with the product in front of your customer when they're in your store or on your website. But then there are communication tools. Lots of social media outlets these days will let you build an online store, but old-fashioned newsletters and emails also work quite effectively. But that brings us to the perplexities of pricing. Pricing is one of those things that's really difficult to get a handle on, and most people, most farmers get really upset when they go into a grocery store and they see the product that they shipped to the grocery store for say $20 for 40 pounds, and when they put it out on the shelf, it's $2 a pound, and you multiply that out, it's 2 or 3 times what the farmer received for it. Well, that's only in the produce section. If you look at a loaf of bread, the farmer is actually receiving pennies for the amount of grain that is in that loaf of bread. So it gets really complex and perplexing to understand pricing at the retail level. So you got to think about what your objectives are when you're pricing something. And if you're in the produce section, it's a little bit easier. So a couple of things to think about. Do you have a large volume you need to move? So you might need to adjust your price a little lower to move a little bit more. When it comes to that, you got to keep in mind that people only eat so much. And if you lower the price too much, it doesn't really matter how much you lower it, because you're not going to get them to buy any more, and you may start eating into your profit margins. So you need to be well aware of what your production costs are, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You may have a differential price, high prices on the number ones, and of course seconds and otherwise wasted items might get a reduced price, or there might be a different price on bulk items in order to move some of that off-grade stuff. You might do something to attract new customers by having lower prices for a while, but then you need to make sure that you're still making a profit. Of course, you don't want to. There's an ad on TV for one of the telephone services, and they are pitting an old loyal customer against a new customer, and the old loyal customer wants the same incentives that the new customer gets with all the new great deals and opportunities. So you need to make sure you're balancing your pricing on whether you're trying to attract those new customers without insulting your loyal customers too. And again, your pricing strategy may be one that projects quality versus bargains. Some farm markets, by their appearance and by their pricing, portrays a high quality product, and others not so high quality. And it may be a spot where folks go to find bargains, and you want to keep that in mind. What is the image you want to portray to your customers, and what customer base do you want to attract? Ultimately, whatever you're doing with your prices, you need to make a profit. If you're not making a profit overall, you're not going to be in business too long. So making a profit is ultimately the final objective of any pricing strategy. Some of those strategies, you might figure out all your production costs and put on a 10, 15, 50% markup to those production costs. But for doing that, you really need to push a pencil and know what it actually costs you to produce. One of the easier ways is to meet the competition. What are other farm markets and grocery stores in the area charging for the same type of product? And remember, direct marketers are a fairly small portion of the market. So people are either coming to a farm market because they want fresher, quality product, which better than what they can find in the grocery store. So you should be able to at least match, if not have a higher price than a local grocery store. On the other hand, those bargain basement hunters might also go to the farmer's market thinking that because you're direct from the farm, you don't have all those costs that the grocery store has, that they're going to find a bargain there. And you can work with both of those customers, but make sure that you communicate which product they're getting for that same, for the prices you're charging. And of course, what the market will bear, that's where it comes in, that you start inching up that price on your product, and eventually the consumers are either going to stop buying, or they'll let you know loud and clear that you're charging too much, and then you need to adjust accordingly. There are methods that go into pricing, and when you start talking about methods, the things that come to mind are loss leaders. Those are those things that you put out at a price that is below production cost, but you're having a sale to attract new people into the store, or to get people into the store in a certain season. It always amazes me when grocery stores put out their loss leaders at the beginning of a new fruit season. So blueberries are always on sale just as the season gets underway, and undercuts the market prices for the rest of the season. It's kind of frustrating back at the farm. Yeah, we can move a lot of volume, but you're not moving that much more because you've cut the price, but you also want us to bear the brunt of that cost, or that cut price. Competitive pricing, again, this is making sure your products are in line with what everybody else is charging. And discounting or sales, having sales in order to move a volume of product that may have built up during the season, and you need to move it before it goes bad. That's the real challenge with perishable produce, is to make sure you're maintaining your prices, but not making it such that you're holding on to product too long and it goes bad, and then you have to cut your price too much. Well, how do you know your cost of production? COP. COP comes in many different forms, but you can have cost of production for your overall farm products. But if you're like most produce growers, you're growing several different types of fruits and vegetables, and you might need to know what each one of those individual crops cost you to produce. Likely the amount of labor involved in harvesting and production of one crop is much different, and that's going to have a much more significant impact on the total cost of production than anything else. So keep that in mind. That's one easy way to figure your cost of production for one crop without actually figuring every single penny that you've spent. Higher labor cost is going to be a much higher cost of production. So what do you do with that cost of production once you know it? Well, if you want to move volume, you can lower that price and have a sale, but you want to keep it above the cost of production, so you're still making something. If you're going to have a loss leader, it's normally for a very short period, so you can drop below the cost of production for a short time, but you want to make sure that it averages out with the rest of the sales for the rest of the season and other crops, so that your overall prices are above the cost of production. And then there's the old problem with being a price taker. In most instances, if you are selling produce into the wholesale commodity market, you are a price taker. Whatever the current market is, that's what it's going to be. If there is a large glut of product in another production area and your wholesale buyers can get it cheaper, you're going to have to match those prices or have some other means of maintaining your price or else you're not going to move your product. So in often cases, anybody selling into the wholesale market, you are a price taker. And knowing your cost of production will let you know how low you can go without cutting into your profits. Well, where are the price makers and the price takers? If you have a direct market, you set your prices. When I was growing up, I worked in an area in upstate. I grew up in an area in upstate New York where there was a famous melon producer. He grew muskmelons and sold it to the New York City crowd that moved north during the summertime. And he became famous because he had a high quality product and he charged high quality prices. But before he got into that business, he was an apple producer and he was taking apples across the river to another wholesale outlet. And at one point, he ended up with prices so low that he brought the load of apples back home. And at that point is when he decided he was no longer going to be a price taker, he was going to be a price maker, and figured out how to get into direct market sales. This was long before the age of the internet, so he was working primarily with a small farm market, but even bigger sales through mail order to those vacationers who came north during the summertime, but then wanted his product when they got back home. So he shipped a lot of melons to people in New York City. So direct market options that let you be a price maker, that could be a farm market, either on farm or a tailgate market and a community farm market. The CSA is the current a current option, subscription agriculture, where you get your customers to buy a share early in the season, and then you give them a set amount of product throughout the rest of the season for that early subscription. Mail order still exists, but it's going to be a lot more based on internet and social media sales than it is going to be via newsletters and direct mail. Ultimately, price makers are working directly with the consumer, and that's how they get to be able to set their price. But if you're a price taker, again, any of those wholesale market outlets, you are negotiating your price with a processor long before the season starts. The cooperative may help you get a better price and move volume along with your cooperative members, but they are still selling into that, primarily into that wholesale food chain, and taking prices that they negotiate on the fly in a commodity market. So if you want to be a price maker, one of the other ways to do it, and one of the few ways to do it in the wholesale market, but it also works in the retail market as well, is to sell what consumers want. That could be today selling sustainability. And sustainability means a lot of things to a lot of people. There's an argument now going on as to which metrics you use to determine what is sustainability. But in any case, sustainability is currently the rage and what will sell. You can use that to claim that you're being innovative in reducing waste, but at the same time, you can be creating value-added products. And how does that work? Well, clever renaming or packaging increases income. Years and years ago, a clever marketer put a green, a yellow, and a red bell pepper in a sleeve and called it a stoplight pepper. No different than the bulk peppers that were being sold out of the basket, but they could charge 3 times more for a fancy name. More recently, in the innovative waste reduction area in the same crop, company out of California, Baloian Farms, started putting some of the off-grade, off-shaped peppers into a sleeve and called them odd bells. And they got lots of publicity and sold a lot of off-grade product that way. maybe not for as high a price as the number ones, but they still move their product at a higher price point. Selling sustainability also, you can talk about the environment, reducing your trash stream, recycling and composting. But remember, on the social side, tell your story. If you're donating to food and feeding programs, if you are doing things to increase the wages and quality of life of your workers on your farm, all of those things help you tell the story of sustainability that consumers are interested in knowing about. Another way, again, is other forms of adding value and being able to make your price, set your price, are doing things that add value. And for the most part, that means processing or at least fancy packaging. So making family-oriented consumer packs, whether that be with a fresh product such as the ocean spray bag of cranberries in the center, or processing it into a different product that increases volume and price without sacrificing the price or the value and quantity of material. And it's also normally a way to use off-grade product that wouldn't normally be sold in the fresh bag. So turning things into juice and jellies, craisins is a rage right now. But we here in New Jersey have a new food innovation center, actually not so new, it's about 20 years old now, but they will work with any farmers in the state and in the region. I recently read an article about a group out of Pennsylvania that worked with our food innovation center to create a new product, and they have had several success stories. So I'm not sure what is available to people in Delaware, but certainly if you want to contact our Food Innovation Center, they will either help you directly or direct you to someone closer to you. So again, in all the planning, I want to make sure you get the point that you want to know your market before you plan to plant. This is critically important when it comes to small niche market products and those that have a specific niche consumer. If you think about peppers and if you think you have a large Hispanic population near you, you might just go on the assumption that they all like hot peppers. Well, some do, some like them hot, some like them very, very hot, but not all do. If your Hispanic shoppers happen to be Puerto Rican or Dominican, they like that flavor of a habanero, but they don't want the heat. But they have come up with a pepper that has that flavor and shape. It's called the ají dulce, or the spice pepper. And so if you find out that your shoppers are Puerto Rican or Dominican, they're the ones you want to grow ají dulce for. On the other hand, you might think that the jalapeno has to be hot, and you might question whether you should be growing varieties that don't crack or do crack. Well, if you take a variety that doesn't crack to a Mexican consumer, they're going to look at it and say, nope, not good enough, not hot enough, there are no cracks. If you take it to an American traditional consumer, they're going to look at the cracks and say, oh, something's wrong with this one, and throw it away. Turns out that you can get varieties that crack more or less, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything when it comes to heat or quality. Cracking is just a natural process that the plant goes through. It detracts from the appearance, possibly, if you consider that to be a defect. But on the other hand, a lot of Mexicans will look at that and equate that with hotter peppers. It doesn't necessarily mean true, but we did a study a few years ago comparing different varieties of jalapenos, and it turns out that those with the most checking weren't necessarily those with the most heat. But if you put a bin full of peppers, jalapenos out, and it's mixed with both check free and high checked, and you have a mixed consumer base, the Mexicans will pull out all the cracked ones, and the American consumer will pull out the clean ones, and assuming that they each meet their own particular needs, even though there's no difference whatsoever. Just a little trick to add to the mix. Well, how do you learn about your customers? You can go to the uscensus.gov and try to dig through all kinds of tables and compare different means of different demographics. It's a lot of work. It's kind of complex. It's not so easy, not so user-friendly, unless you're a statistician and you like digging through those kind of tables. But there are several tools out there that can be used. I like to work with ethnic markets, ethnic crops for ethnic markets, and it turned out that our New Jersey Department of Labor has analyzed the demographic makeup of a lot of our counties to be able to tell employers what the labor pool is. And so they've put together some nice graphics to demonstrate that. I wondered if Delaware had a similar tool out there, and though I didn't find it from the state, I did find this site called statisticalatlas.com, and if you put in the state that you're interested in, it will tell you the breakdown of race and ethnicity in different divisions of the state. This one happens to be a county subdivision, and I looked at the Asian populations. If you're in southern Delaware and you're growing a lot of Asian fruits and vegetables, I hope you're moving up north to one of the markets up in near Wilmington or Newark, because otherwise you've got to convert a lot of local people to those crops that they might not be familiar with. And that's really what we've been working on here in New Jersey for several years, analyzing both the types of crops that we might grow for ethnic populations, but also studying and trying to show our growers how to find those markets. So we developed on our SARE website a market research tool, and this takes all that census data that I said was not so easy to work your way through and puts it in a graphic form. So if you put in the right type of information, it'll show you exactly where the population centers for different ethnicities can be found. And then you can, if that's where your market is, then you can grow the crops appropriate for that group. I work with a fellow who's a recent immigrant from Liberia, and he likes to grow crops for his community. And so this is the map that shows where a lot of Liberians reside in New Jersey. But it also has another link here to allow you to view potential crops. And that takes you to my own website, which is worldcrops.org. And this was created years ago to look at the different types of specialty vegetables grown around the world and link those with the countries where they're grown and consumed, so that if you have a group from that area, you would be able to grow and the right crop and understand how to grow it. So worldcrops.org, we relaunched it. It started in around 2006, but we redid it, updated it, and it relaunched in 2016. This is an example I like to give, going back to the point of telling your story in order to know your customer. Wilson Farm is a very high quality, high profile farmers market right outside of Boston in Lexington. And getting to know them after a couple of visits, because my wife was, or my daughter was working in Boston for a couple of years, I got intrigued with the fact that the owner of this farm actually hosts a walking tour through his farm to discuss what's happening out in the field and what is being done to control pests. And it's really about discussing IPM in order to let his customers know what they do and why they do it. And they'll take customers on a walk through the farm to look at the crops, see what pests are out there and what their options are for controlling them. He said, when I talked to Jim Wilson, he told me that only one person in the 20 years that he's been doing this ever said, I can't come back here because you're using pesticides. Most of them call up with a question, are you organic? Do you use pesticides? And he'll say, come on out on Thursday afternoon and we'll take a walk through the farm and I'll tell you how and why we do. And when they show up and they understand what you're facing and what your options are for controlling pests on the farm, most of them have once they have that understanding, are much more amenable to the use of pesticides and why they're used, how they're used, and they trust the farmer. That's one of the greatest things about being a farmer is you have a very high trust ranking among consumers. And so even more so than going to experts in the field, if you go to the farmer, the consumer trusts what you tell them. So back to knowing your market. Once you know your market, who your customers are, you found out who they are, what they expect, then you know you can start setting competitive prices. When you set competitive prices, you need to know three things. Know what the supply is, both locally, regionally, and nationally. You can get a pretty good idea talking with other farmers what's around yourself, but you can also go to the USDA's National Ag Statistics Service to get some of their reports on what's available around the country. So especially if you're in the wholesale market, knowing what's moving around and what's available is important. If you know, you can also know how it's priced on the wholesale market through the Market News Service. Again, that's more wholesale oriented, but it does give you a general idea of what grocery stores will be paying for the product that they have to then put on their shelves and mark up. As far as the grocery store goes, you want to know what they're charging. So watch for their sale flyers, take a look and see what your product is fetching in their stores, or just go there and visit. A lot of local farmers go and they complain to me. They go in and they're shaking their heads. As I mentioned, they can never understand why it's 3 times more than what they receive for that product when it's on the grocery shelf. And again, listen to your customers. If you want to know what the market will bear, try setting the price up artificially high and see how long it takes to get some feedback about what you've done. How am I doing on time?
You're doing well. You got about another 10 minutes before questions, something like that.
Okay, well, we're going to to be done fairly quickly here.
All right, cool.
So we'll have more time for questions and discussion. Some other resources you might look into for finding out how to price and what things to look for. We have a workbook on our farm management website at Rutgers called To Market to Market. There are also similar worksheets and fact sheets at Penn State Extension site. And Cornell has a series on marketing, and number 6 is oriented toward pricing. All of these give you good examples of, some of them are going to talk a whole lot more about figuring out that cost of production and then doing a similar markup, but they will also give you a good idea about the other techniques we talked about. And again, I'm going to bring it right back to that number 1 rule in marketing. The customer is always right. So once you know who that customer is, they will let you know the right crop to grow. They'll let you know how to harvest it and when to harvest it. They'll want to have it packaged appropriately. And when you do all those things, you'll avoid some costly mistakes, and especially you'll keep your buyer happy. And they'll also let you know how to price it right. So with that, I'm ready for questions. I'm not sure if...
All right, thank you. There were a couple questions that came in the chat box, and they were more like directed towards the audience. But one question was, if anyone has good information for getting started, like a book would be helpful. Less than 5 acres, looking into get started, not sure how to do it from the legality or tax zoning grant perspective. So if anyone has some feedback or resources for Beth, that would be appreciated. And the second question is kind of a statement about Dell Tech offering small business classes. They did several in-depth exercises in customer demographics, and that helped Justin a lot. Do we have any other questions?
I have a quick question, Rick. So for what you see and doing, do you think there'll be any significant changes after the pandemic lifts for products? I know a lot of people kind of got into some gardening and started really immersing themselves in cooking and some of the other things while they were sort of in pandemic mode. Do you think that's going to lead out to some certain trends for farms to be thinking a little farther outside of their normal scope?
Oh, the immersing in cooking is a good thing because people are using more fresh produce. And so that's an opportunity to provide them with the very freshest product direct from your farm. The challenge there is whether they are getting to the farm or they are getting it from a grocery store, or the new trendy thing of getting it in a box delivered directly to them. There are more and more of each of those, and as the restaurants remain closed, that demand is going to stay high. On the other hand, if the pandemic lifts and restaurants are able to reopen at full capacity, you may see a little bit of a drop in that, although I think people have gotten used to cooking at home more over this past year, more intrigued by it, and it may take some time for them to get back into the, I'll just stop and pick up something on the way home versus making it myself. Also, as the pandemic lifts, the question is whether or not more and more people will be going back to work. Schools will reopen, and you won't have the kids at home. When that happens, the question is whether that will impact how much people are able and willing to, number one, garden for themselves, and number two, cook for themselves. I suspect that gardening will drop a little bit. It was, again, a fairly quick reaction last year. A lot of people got frustrated because they didn't have the positive experience that they hoped for. Some of them may be challenged and want to try it again, but others may say, oh, I don't have to grow it this year because I can go back to the store and get it. So it's really going to be tough to predict it accurately, which way it's going to go, but I suspect we're going to see a mix of things.
Okay, we actually had another question from Saladin. He said that he missed the last bullet point after no competition what competition charges.
Is that showing up on the screen?
Yep. So there you go.
So
we have another question. Sorry.
If you know what the competition charges, to know that, you want to visit the stores, visit other people's stores and watch for sales flyers. Then you can understand what they're charging. And to know what the market will bear, that's a matter of listening to your customers about how your prices are, and they'll let you know whether it's too high or it's too much of a bargain. Often it's harder to dig out the low prices than it will be to dig out the high prices. They'll let you know immediately on the ladder, but they might not hint that you're not charging enough.
Thank you very much, Rick. We appreciate the information.